Let's try that again. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Calling the City of Menasha Common Council Workshop to order here at 4:30. So I just want to say thank you for everybody being here, and we have a special guest with us, Daniel Foth, who is, a local government specialist. So I want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here, and I would just like to hand it off to you.
Great, thank you. Everybody. Now you can hear, oh, that's much better. Thank you. I wave my hands a lot when I speak, so if you hear me whack the microphone, you've been warned. My name, again, is Daniel Foth. I'm a local government specialist with UW-Madison's Division of Extension, Community Development Institute, Local Government Education Program, and I'm also the director of the Certified Public Manager Program. So I've probably done about 40 of these presentations this year. When the league quit doing their elected official 101, we've received a lot of comments about, or a lot of requests for doing these similar kinds of presentations. And I understand from the fire chief that he heard me speak in Neenah, excuse me. And apparently he was brave enough to still recommend me to come over here. And just for the alders, if you could just tell me your name, your time on the council, and what keeps you busy or what you're employed at. And Randy, can we start with you?
Of course, Mr. Cole. Randy Rapella, this is my fourth, eighth year, my seventh year. As an alderman, retired teacher, still coach basketball, and enjoy golfing.
I'm Alderman Ted Cruddy, District 7. In my 8th year, I also was employed as a cost accountant for a local business.
Great.
Tom Marshall, I'm newly elected this year, the spring of this year, so once on the council, 11 years as part of the board. Presently work at Frequent Hotel Conference and stay busy by doing a lot of activities, like marijuana, back to back.
My name is Chris Bruce. I was elected in last April, so a little over a year. Currently, I am expert with our political people. Before that, I was working with the so I don't know that.
Nice. Mayor.
My name's Hammond. I've been mayor for 6 months. Prior, I served on the common council. Prior to this, I worked with nonprofit for humanity, Catholic Science Center, Development Board, and this keeps me pretty busy. Otherwise, I do travel.
Hi, Terry.
Terry Perkins. I'm Terry
Are we
Perkins.
recording now? We are recording, so no one's hearing that.
I'll talk normally. How about that? I'm Terry Perkins. I've been on the council 5 months, about 6, and I'm employed with UW-Oshkosh.
Oh, great.
I work at Virginia.
Okay, I do a lot of work with Michael Ford.
I know the name.
Okay, he's the MPA program.
I was up at Fox,
Oh, got it.
and I was part of the layoffs and shipped down to the campus. But that was in March. So March and April will be.
Okay. And Stan.
I'm Stan Sevenick, I'm the council president. I've been on the council on and off for more than 10 years. I started a business more than 37 years ago. Just recently retired.
also contacted Selena, all the persons, and told me that the program was worth it.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. Wow. I mentioned earlier that Lincoln was right. You can fool some of the people all of the time. All right, so let's get to it. So when I'm working with governing bodies, the first thing I talk about is know and stay in your lane. In other words, and we'll talk some more about what this means, but basically what your job is, what the staff's job is. So the Common Council, your function is visionary. So when you get home tonight, you can tell your significant other, you found out you were a visionary today. It'll be fun to hear if you get the same reaction my wife gave me when I told her that. But really your function is as a visionary. Your authority is collective. None of you by yourselves can make any decisions on behalf of the Common Council or for the city without the collective support or approval of all of you. So keep that in mind. One of your key jobs is to legislate, to enact policy. You want to hold the staff accountable for policy implementation, but you don't have any operational or staff control because that lies with the mayor as effectively the chief executive officer of the city. Communications with the staff, gathering information is always encouraged. You budgetary approval, and I do a lot of financial budget presentations, and I personally think your budget is the biggest and most important job you folks have each year. And then, of course, cooperate with other governments. So what does this mean, collective leadership? Well, you want to inspire with each other a shared vision. You want to challenge the process when it needs to be challenged. You want to help others to act. And I always say encourage the heart and recognize that a lot of decisions you make aren't always about dollars and cents. They're also about people and how those people are affected by those decisions. You involve, hopefully, represent, and you're accountable to the public. Your focus, again, is on long-term rather than the past or very short-term. And again, I got off my slides there. So again, the management, according to your council rules, is entrusted to the mayor, who's in charge of the day-to-day operations. So what does it mean to be a visionary? Well, I pulled this stuff out of some Google searches I did and then combined it. So a visionary is a person thinking about or planning the future with imagination and wisdom, a person with original ideas about what the future could be or could be like, thinking about the present and asking yourself, based on the present, what would the future look like? And it's the foundation that you should use to build a strategy for achieving the city's desired future goals. I mentioned earlier I'm the director of the Certified Public Manager Program, and I'll give a little commercial about that when I get done here. But I've learned a lot about leadership because we have 4 of the classes for the 18-month program are focused strictly on leadership, different aspects of leadership. And I like this quote, "Good leaders have vision and inspire others to help them turn vision into reality." So your function as alders, again, you serve your primary legislative function through lawmaking, budgetary approval, and cooperative decision-making. And again, your authority is collective versus individual. And you'll hear me repeat myself sometimes tonight, and I do that on purpose. I used to live in Atlanta, and my wife would make the Pope look like a Protestant. And she came to me one day and said, "Hey, I want to try out one of these evangelical churches in town." I said, "All right, let's go." So we went to North Point Church, which is the pastor's a guy named Andy Stanley, who in addition to have written a lot of really good religious books, also has written a couple of really good leadership books. And we get there, and it was basically a rock concert disguised as a church service. A church service disguised as a rock concert. The music was wonderful, and finally the time comes, and Andy Stanley comes to give his message. And like 3 minutes into it, I'm just about ready to jump off my chair because he kept repeating himself over and over and over again. It just was driving me crazy. So on the way home, and we had plenty of time to talk about it on the way home because there were 5,000 people in church that day, and I didn't realize what time I needed to get there to get a parking spot closer to the front door. So we spent a lot of time waiting for all the cars to leave the parking lot. And so my wife said, well, what'd you think? And I've learned through many years of painful experience with my wife, always let her say what she thinks first, then I'll know what's safe to tell her. I said, well, I don't know, honey, what do you think? And so she says, well, wasn't the music great? I said, yep, the music was great. And I said, anything else? She said, well, I really liked the message. I said, well, do you think he repeated himself a little too much? And she said, oh, wasn't it wonderful? I really got it the third time he said it. And I had an aha moment. And so if you're upset about the fact I'm repeating myself tonight, you can blame Andy Stanley. So some questions for alders to think about, and that's why I put this meme in here, and you're all going to get a copy of this, right? Is that correct? Yep. And I think this meme is really good because it talks about what's happening, why is it important, what don't I see, what do I know, who's saying it, and what else, what if. And I think the what else, what if is really important because instead of asking why, you're asking what, which is a more kind of expansive way to think about what it is you know that you don't know. I do a lot of presentations with clerks, and I always ask them in the front slide, what's the key thing that drives you crazy about working with your governing body? And the first thing they say is they're not prepared. They didn't read the stuff beforehand. They show up, they ask a bunch of questions. Had they read the stuff, they would have already known what it was they needed to know. Then the second one they always come up is they don't get to the meeting on time. They sort of wander in whenever they feel like it. I also think it's important you want to contribute, but as appropriate, not just contribute for the sake of contributing. Respecting, obviously, each other's opinions and comments. And that's really key because, again, you're trying to be a collective body. So if you're not respecting other people, they're not going to respect you, and it's a lot harder to get to decisions if you don't like each other very much. The other thing, sidebar discussions. So sometimes you're in the middle of a meeting, something's going on, it's not as particularly interesting as some other agenda topic, and so a natural consequence of that is to lean over and start chatting to the person next to you. And if you watch any C-SPAN, you'll see the members of Congress doing that all the time. But when you think about it, if you were speaking and somebody else was doing that, you'd probably feel a little disrespectful. So try not to do that. Focus on this topic, not last week's vote. I attended a village board meeting just north of Wausau, whose name will remain nameless. They started at 5 p.m. They got over at 2 in the morning. And they had a whole audience full of people from other communities there for different parts of the agenda. And the reason it took them so long was 2 of the board members were upset at a budget number addition mistake that had been made on the budget 2 years earlier. And every time something came up, they wanted to relitigate that whole conversation. And unfortunately, the village president wasn't very good at managing the meeting and kind of let them drone on. Listen to understand, we'll talk some more about that. Voting, I'll talk some more about that. And again, mute and stay off your personal electronic devices, and that's also part of your rules. And I should have mentioned that sooner. You have a couple of documents that talk about your rules. The first is Chapter 2 of your ordinances, and the other is your Resolution R1324, which you passed earlier this year. And then also a orientation manual has been put together. If you haven't read through these rules, or you're not sure you remember all of them, it's a good idea to do that periodically. One, so you understand what the rules are, and secondly, and I'll talk about this in a little while, how those rules, especially with regard to parliamentary procedure, come into play. So, policy versus administration and operations. So policy, that's your job, is the what and the why. Administration and operations is the staff, and that's the how, when, and where. So in this example, policy is what? Will we fund some new highway equipment? The why, is it necessary service to our citizens? The administration then decides, the department heads, How will we plow the roads? When will we start repairs? And where will we fill the potholes? So the policy, again, is you folks and the mayor, as a member of the council, related to the overall mission and purpose. Again, the vision. It's a longer-term viewpoint. You want to make sure you're addressing the key issues, both current and future, and focus on strategy development. I work with a number of local governments in helping them do a strategic planning process, which I find is a great way to put everybody on the same page. And this license plate was on a car in Sun Prairies. I thought it was nice, so I took a picture. So the council committees, you folks, and this is typically, I see council committees made up of 3 or 4 alders on each committee and mixed it up. You folks actually all sit together on the administration, Board of Public Works, and personnel committees. And why do you have those committees? Because that's where you want to get the work done. That's where you have the most of your discussions about what's the best approach, what's the best vision, how to best fulfill the vision. Typically, your council meeting is to ratify those decisions, especially since you sit on all the key committees to start with. And if you want to relitigate the committee work at a council meeting, ask yourself, why do we have both? If you've already had this discussion at the committee meeting, is it really necessary to relitigate it at a council meeting? So the operations, the mayor, department heads, and staff, and again, the mayor is the chief executive officer, their job is to implement your policies, your strategy. Necessarily then it's shorter term thinking, right? Typically a month out, 2 months out. And they're focused on the day-to-day operations, smaller functions. They require attention to detail. And most importantly, what does it take to be an alder? You have to be 18, and you have to live in your district, right? What does it take to be a finance director? Typically specialized financial training, perhaps being a certified public accountant, perhaps having an MBA in finance. Same with your public works director. Well, you don't have a public works director right now, but if you had a public works director, typically they're going to have special training to there. So my point there is keep in mind that when you're working with the staff, they've got that specialized training. I'm not telling you to always believe everything they tell you, and I'm not telling you not to challenge whatever they're telling you. I'm just saying respect the training that they have. So, alder and staff relations, and these are some questions I just want you to think about for yourself. I'm not looking for any answers. But ask yourself, as you're working with the staff, what value do they bring to this subject, short-term or long-term? How do you ensure you're focused on policy implementation and not operational decisions? How are you going to get the most value from your staff? What are the best ways to keep a staff? That village that I told you about, their entire staff quit within a month of that meeting because they were just tired of being berated by that governing body. And they are on their 10th search. This was 2 years ago for an administrator. The longest they've kept an administrator was 30 days. And then they figure out what they bought into and leave. How important is the city's reputation as a great place to work? And what are you going to do to build trust, public trust in the city, the Common Council, and staff? And really it's all about creating what kind of culture do you want the city of Menasha to have between yourselves and your staff and your citizens. So to summarize, policy making equals the ends, administration is the means. And it kills me to use this slide, but I do anyway because it's Wisconsin. I grew up in Illinois, so that makes me a Bears fan. But I'm not a Cubs fan because I can only stand so much disappointment in 1 year. So the Packers have a board of directors. The board represents the shareholders, and I'm proud to say my wife, 2 of my daughters and my granddaughters are all shareholders. But you don't see the board members on the sidelines calling plays, and nor are they in the huddle to get the play accomplished. So we're going to have a quick roles and responsibilities discussion here to see if any of you were paying attention to what I was telling you. So a citizen calls to complain their street has not been plowed. You should call the snowplow operator and order them to plow the street immediately. Thank the citizen and remind them they did not vote for you, so sorry for their hard luck. Call the Public Works front desk and leave a message. If it's an ongoing issue, the Public Works Director then will get back to you so you understand what's going on. If it's after hours, weekends, holidays, contact the mayor, or have another cup of coffee and do nothing. Anybody want to venture with the right? There are two right answers here. C for sure, yep. And D. So now we're going to get into a little bit about meetings. John Kenneth Galbraith, famous economist. A couple of you may not know that since you're a little younger than I am. But he said meetings are indispensable when you don't want to do anything. Hopefully that's not here. So the mayor or chair, council president in this case, or if any of you are chairing one of your committees, your job is to be responsible for the agenda, but members may place items on the agenda. The clerk actually prepares the agenda, and anywhere you see this green type, that's a reference back to one of these documents. The chair has all rights of participation, including making and seconding motions. And I've given this presentation to a couple of city councils, and they're all shocked that the mayor can make motions and second motions.
During a council meeting,
Yes.
the mayor has no voting on this.
No, I didn't say voting. I said making motions or seconding motions. The mayor can make a motion, someone else could second it, but if the mayor makes a motion, or if you as council president make a motion, or if you're the chair of one of your committees and you make a motion, you should step down from the chair through the conversation, because the chair is supposed to be neutral. So if the chair, whoever's chairing the meeting, has an obvious interest in the subject matter, then they should turn the gavel over to the next person, vice chair or council president or whatever the order is.
Like he has an opinion on that topic or something.
If he voices that opinion, yes. Okay. Now, voting is different. The mayor can only vote in case of a tie. Okay. And the chair is responsible for administrating the group's deliberations, and I'll talk some more about that. So who sets the agenda? Did I miss one? Oh, I did. Sorry. So the purpose of the agenda is to set expectations for the members of the governmental body and the public as to what's going to be discussed and the order in which it's going to be discussed. The other purpose of the agenda is to conform with the Wisconsin Open Meetings Law. So who sets the agenda? You have a number of rules on this. So the clerk is responsible for developing the agenda and noticing the meeting. The order of business is laid out in your resolution. Any alder in writing can ask the clerk to place an item on the agenda as long as it's done within this time frame. Any alder can introduce an ordinance, and an alder can always make a motion at a meeting to add an agenda item to the next meeting's agenda. And that's covered in Robert's rules specifically. So your minutes, the minutes should be, so if you're ever wondering when you get the minutes and they seem kind of short because you had this big lengthy discussion and all that's in the minutes is the motion, who seconded it, and did it pass or not? And that's by design. The minutes should just provide the core concept of what happened. They should not be a blow-by-blow of the discussion back and forth. Now, some cities or villages, towns that I present to, they like to have a short synopsis in the minutes. In other words, we discussed these 4 considerations as before we voted. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not necessary.
What if there's a disagreement? What if, let's say, I want what I said, because it really was the other side in there, but it's not placed in the minutes.
So you can always pass a council rule.
And I know the rule, but I want you to explain.
Okay, so the reason that isn't done, unlike the congressional record, which records everything everybody says, is because state law says it's just these items, which is, whoops, right here, the substance. Here we go. An intelligible abstract, I love the verbiage, or synopsis of the essential elements of the official action taken by a local governing body, including the subject matter of a motion, making, seconded, and if there's a roll call vote, who voted what. And that's in Wisconsin statutes. So if you decide to make a local rule that you want some more information in that synopsis, you certainly have the ability to do that. But state law doesn't require it.
So if I request that my comment be added and the council agrees.
Yes.
And then how about on a committee level, like the Parks Board? They're a little more, I don't want to use the word verbatim, but there's a little more information because we depend on those minutes of what went on. We don't vote at every single meeting because they're just, we have to be a full-time council.
So, again, it's your collective action and decision that would decide how much more information you want in committee meeting minutes versus the council meeting minutes.
I think they do a pretty good job of that.
Yeah. And the other difference between the committees, especially if you're looking to the committees to do the thinking and the groundwork so that you can make a better decision as a council, you'd want to have some better understanding of how did they reach that decision. So I'm just saying, here's what you have to do. You certainly can do more. So again, the core concept is focus what it did, not what was said, and focused on these ideas announced, reported, discussed, ordered, commitments made, decisions made.
In the past, I didn't care so much about, now I don't care so much about that as in the past, as all I mean is important.
Okay. Then it would be redundant to have that extra information. Got it. Okay, recording formal decisions, exact wording of all motions. So if you've made a motion, someone seconded, give the clerk time to write down exactly what the motion is, and don't be upset with the clerk if the clerk says, hold on, I need the exact wording. Just recognize that state law requires the exact wording.
We usually bring it in for her in advance if you're going to add an amendment or anything like that.
Yeah. But I've also been, and this is probably more true at committee meetings, where you have all this discussion and then somebody makes a motion, because the committee meetings are typically more informal. And I cannot tell you how many times I've seen people have this discussion and somebody says, I move what he said. What did he say? I don't know. And the other thing to note, if you do a lot of your business by voice vote, each one of you has the right to ask for a roll call vote on any motion that you're voting on. So just keep that in mind. So what's a meeting? Under the state statute, a meeting is a gathering of members of a governmental body for purposes of exercising its responsibilities. So there's three parts there. First, you got to gather. Secondly, you got to be a governmental body. And third, you got to be exercising your duties. So the intent of the open meetings law is to ensure public access and open decision making. I remember when I first started Extension, we were doing fall workshops with towns and villages, and we were giving a presentation on the open meetings law, and one of the town governing body members from, I don't remember where they're from anymore, stood up and said, when are we going to get rid of this damn open meetings law? It's just too hard. Well, not anytime soon. Through advanced public notice of meetings, meetings that are open and accessible to public, and we'll talk about that, and limited closed sessions. So, first thing is, what's a governing body? Well, clearly the city council, clearly any committees that you form, any task forces that you create, anything that you've created or your council itself is subject to the open meetings law. So for example, if you decided to create a special economic development task force, you appoint a couple of yourselves, some citizen members, some residents, whatever, then those citizen members would also be subject to the open meetings law because you created that economic development task force. But if the Chamber of Commerce comes to you and says, we're going to create an economic development task force, and we'd like a couple of you to sit on that, now that's not something you created. You're just participating. And as long as no more than 5 of you, 6 of you show up, you should be fine. So a meeting has 2 tests. First is the numbers test. So let's say this is a committee of 5. These 3 people are a committee of 5. 3 people are there. 3 is a quorum, right, for a 5-member committee. So they pass the numbers test. So it's presumed they're having a meeting. But it can be rebutted by the purpose test. In other words, what were they discussing when they were all 3 sitting there? They could have been discussing the Packers. They could have been discussing the latest movies. They could be discussing whatever. They could be discussing the school board. As long as they're not discussing city business, it's not a violation. So keep in mind those 2 tests. One is the numbers test. Do you have enough people to establish a quorum? Now let's say this was a committee of 6 people and 3 are there and they are discussing business. Is that an open meetings law violation? It could be, and most likely is, because 3 can vote something down. So keep that in mind. All you have to have is enough people there to affect an action being taken by the governing body or committee. So 6 people committee, 3 people could vote it down. That's enough. That's a violation. So the numbers test, again, is 1/2 are presented. A lesser number, again, like I said, can meet the test because if you had a committee of 4, 2 of you are meeting, again, you could impact. Well, come on. What if my battery died? Oh, good. So here's a question for you. And I had these quizzes periodically just to see if you're still awake. So we've got the 3 people meeting at the local restaurant. We've got the entire city council at a function, and we've got 1 person. Oops, now it's going too fast. So, again, 3 people, 5-person committee. Are they violating the open meetings law? The entire council's at a function. Are they violating the open meeting law? The 1 person sitting in the audience by themselves, is that a violation? Is it none of the above, or you need more information? You need more information because the 3 people could be discussing the Packers. This could be a play. You just all happen to be there because it's a really good play. As long as you're not discussing city business, you might meet the numbers test, but you don't meet the purpose test. And 1 person is never a violation of the open meetings law.
I'm going to give you an example. We had a situation like that where a local business had a 1-year anniversary. Actually, behind it. I didn't know that she was there. I didn't know the mayor was there. Some of us were there, so we left.
As long as you didn't discuss city business, you didn't have to leave.
So then there was another event that came up. You know what it was, and I called the clerk and I said, let's post this. Brews on Bagel, we have a
Ooh.
park event here.
Yeah.
Where we mostly all attend. So I said, we better post that.
You can never go wrong posting. But just keep in mind, as long as you don't discuss municipal business, city business, you can all be standing at the same bar together. So quorum is 2/3 of the common council members. That's statute requirement, and your ordinance also says the same thing. A quorum must be present to conduct business. And if the meeting is noticed and you don't have a quorum, what do? You go home. Don't conduct any business without a quorum. Because anything that is you do or say, you'll just have to redo it and re-say it at a meeting where you have a quorum. And I'm sorry, Rebecca, would you mind introducing yourself and how long you've been on the council and what it is you do for a living or just hanging out?
I'm Rebecca Nichols. I've been on the council for almost 12 years.
Great.
And I represent the 1st District, which is most of Doty Island and some of the downtown.
Nice. Okay, so we have some special cases, and I like this cartoon. All those in favor of what we discussed in our email thread and Larry's son's birthday party last week, say aye. And the audience is going, whoa, whoa, what? So I'm going to get into walking quorum in more detail, but very simply, a walking quorum is where you're not all in a room together, but you're going one to one to one to one to one to promote your thoughts, be upset about something, whatever it is. And it doesn't matter how the walking quorum happens. It could be email, text, it could be emails, text, a social media post. So you might have a Facebook page where you're telling your constituents what's going on in your district. If you have a Facebook page, my advice to you is to block all the other council members, because the minute a majority or quorums, or excuse me, a majority of the council, 5, starts posting to your Facebook account, now you've got a potential open meetings law violation. And I'm not looking at you specifically, I'm just... So walking quorum, I pulled the Department of Justice Office of Open Government posted some very specific advice about walking quorums. I'm not going to go through all the detail, but suffice it to say, try to avoid walking quorums, because if you talk, you stand and Terry talk, then Terry talks to Rebecca, and Rebecca talks to Tom, and Tom talks to Kirsten. At some point, you're going to reach a potential walking quorum issue. So it's just better to do your business here in the public eye, as the statute requires. So you can have closed sessions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the key thing to remember with closed sessions is, first and foremost, it has to meet one of the statutory definitions. You can't close a session just because you're uncomfortable talking about something in the public eye. It has to meet the statutory definition. You've got a great city attorney who will advise you whether it does or it doesn't. Some of the typical ones are, if you're looking at buying land or selling land, you can go into closed session and have a discussion about what would happen with that, what your price range might be, personnel matters typically, and again, on property investments. If you have unions here, I can't remember, yeah, so obviously those are closed sessions. A million years ago, I did public sector labor bargaining in Minnesota. They did not have that exception, so I had to talk to the city council about our bargaining position in an open meeting. The union guy sitting right there, right? It was fun. Closed session procedures. Well, come on, there we go. First and foremost, you have to convene an open session. So what does that tell you? If the closed session is not identified as such on the agenda, can you go into closed session? No. Even if it meets one of the statutory definitions. Either hold that item over to the next meeting or create a special meeting where you properly agendize it. You've got a really good clerk here, so I don't think you're ever going to have that problem, but just in case. You then have to vote to go into closed session. Now, if you vote no, and later you found out because someone litigated whether you properly went into closed session and you didn't, and it wasn't a proper going into closed session, we'll say hypothetically, you're off the hook because you voted no. You can't be fined or found guilty of being in illegal closed session. For you brand new people, I'm not telling you to always vote no when you go into closed session, but just keep it in mind. And then, oh, there we go. And the other reason it's important to do, for closed sessions, I think it's a good practice to always do a roll call vote. That way you know who voted yes and who voted no. But if it's unanimous, if you do it by voice vote and you all vote yes, then the minutes should reflect the fact it was unanimous.
I think we do a good job of that. We have a professional. And they're usually like proper.
Yep. So, closed session procedures. Now, if you voted no, not to go into closed session, do you get to go into the closed session if it passes? Yes, because why? You're still a member of the governing body, right? So even if you vote no, you still have the right to be in the closed session. Also, any personnel essential to the closed session discussion, and I always think it's a good idea to have the city clerk and an attorney in there. One, because if later someone alleges you went into closed session illegally, or somebody argues that you talked about something besides what you said you're going to closed session about, you've got two unbiased opinions that can testify, nope, that's not what happened. And the council can create a rule. Right now, if you go to a committee, well, you all sit on all the committees with the exception of a couple of them, but if you are, I think it was the police and fire, that's just 2 or 3 of you that are on that one, if I remember right? Yeah. So if they go into closed session, you're there as a council member, but not a member of that fire commission, you would normally get to go into that fire commission meeting unless you, the council, passed a resolution saying no, you can only people who are on there can. You want to, again, limit the discussion to the items discussed, or excuse me, to the announced agenda item. And then you can't go back into open session unless your agenda makes it really clear you're going into open session once the closed session is done. And the reason for that is most places go into closed session at the end of their meeting, sometimes beginning, but usually the end. And so any spectator who's come to listen to a matter is going to presume that you're not coming back because it wasn't on the agenda. So you have citizen participation, and it's kind of interesting how you do it because it's not something I've seen, and I've looked at a lot of council rules. This is the first time I've seen this, but I kind of like it. So first of all, you allow people to speak on anything involving the city, whether it's on the agenda or not. And then you have the citizen reprise, so that's the public comment, and then the citizen reprise is where they can speak just to agenda items. There is a 5-minute limit per person. That's frankly kind of long. A lot of places use 3 minutes because if most citizens can't say what their concern is in 3 minutes, but 5 minutes is fine too. But if it's the public comment side of things, you can ask clarifying questions, but you cannot debate the citizens' comments because why? It's not on the agenda. You could put it on a future agenda. And for the reprise thing, the chair can provide limited answers, but again, no debate, according to your rules. So, walking quorum. You're a member of a committee of 5 people. You post your request on your Alder Facebook page for community input on an upcoming committee meeting item. 2 other alders also on the committee respond. Violation? Yep. But what happens if you just see the 2 people in the hallway and you start talking? Violation? Yep. Why? It doesn't matter how you do it, it's that you did it. So open meetings. At a committee meeting, you realize an agenda item is better dealt with in a closed session because it fits one of the statutory definitions to close a meeting. Therefore, can you make a motion to close the meeting right then and there? No, because it's not on the agenda as a closed meeting. You can say, I want to postpone this to a later date, and then go through the proper closed meeting procedures. So now we're going to talk a little bit about meeting procedures. So the whole reason for meeting procedures, and this comes pretty much right out of Robert's rules, is to facilitate a discussion made by the majority, providing the ability to hear all views, providing an orderly way to disagree without being disagreeable, set expectations for the meeting process and conduct. And so the sources of meeting rules, first and foremost, you go to the state statutes. And the state statutes are pretty basic. They define a motion, they define what a meeting is, they define needing a second, they define what needs to be in the minutes. You have your local government meeting rules, which are noted down here, and then and only then would you go to Robert's rules. So your meeting rules cover some topics about like dividing your questions, things like that. From what I read, it looks like it follows Robert's pretty closely. But where you have your own meeting rules, you always go there first if the state statute doesn't cover it. So why meeting rules and procedures? Again, making sure everyone has fair treatment. You've got clear communication through clear motions, meeting decorum, meeting agenda approach, and again, all of that's listed here. Remember I think it was Robert Fulgrim's, the things I learned in kindergarten that I still learn. I don't know if it was 5 things or whatever. My youngest daughter was quite enamored with it, so I had to get her a poster. This is a similar kind of meme, but I kind of liked it, so that's why I included it. So now we're going to talk a little bit about meeting dynamics. And I like this meme. A meeting is a deliberation where hours are wasted and minutes are recorded. Hopefully not your meetings. So when you come to the meeting, ask yourselves, what's the purpose of the meeting? Does everybody understand what that purpose is? Because sometimes you get talking and you get cross, you start having a challenging discussion because nobody understood what the purpose of the meeting or the discussion was supposed to be about. Obviously, all of us are very different people. You're going to approach a meeting in very different ways. Same with our personalities. And I personally believe that the more you know, the better decisions you can make. So before the meeting, Benjamin Franklin said, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. So again, and I know I'm repeating myself, but do your homework before the meeting. If something on the agenda doesn't make any sense to you, then contact the clerk for clarification. Or if it's a department head matter, ask the department head or talk to the mayor or the city attorney. You may not like their answer, and by all means at your council meeting, bring it up if you don't like what you were told. But by finding out ahead of time, at least you'll understand what it was. So we've got some decorum rules. And again, staying on the agenda. I've sat in some council meetings where somebody really likes agenda item 5, and you're on agenda item 3, and they immediately want to move to agenda item 5. Unless you've changed the order, unless you've all collectively agreed to change the order, you got to go according to the agenda. Again, staying on topic. Same meeting, the guy that wanted agenda item 5, when they were having a discussion on agenda item 3, started talking about agenda item 5, and the presiding officer had to say, hey, wait till we get there. Avoid or refrain from speaking against your own motion. I've done this myself where I make a motion about something, someone seconds it, discussion ensues, and pretty soon I realize, boy, this was the dumbest thing I've ever thought of. Why did I make this stupid motion? So then I try to withdraw it. You can't withdraw a motion once it's been moved and seconded. It belongs to everybody. So the only way to withdraw a motion at that point is to make a motion to withdraw the motion and get a second and have a vote. Avoid negative motions. Who knows what a negative motion is? So let's say you all decide you're mad at the mayor, you're going to vote not to send the mayor to the league annual meeting. So if the motion passes, what happens? He can't go. But if the motion fails, does that mean he gets to go? So when you're making motions, make sure the result is clear. In other words, the motion is written so if it's a yes vote, this happens. If it's a no vote, this happens. So give that some thought.
Make it clear, it's on the agenda.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that works that way. Refrain from actions that disturb the assembly and respect. And I personally think, come on, there we go. If everybody followed the golden rule, you'd never have any issues at meetings because you're all treating each other with how you want to be treated. So the next things we're going to talk about, I guess I got to aim it this way. There we go. These are all some best practice ideas. You may or may not want to agree with them, which is fine. I'm just going to go through them and give you a sense of some of the different things you can think about as you're fulfilling your roles. So first is biases. We all have biases, right? We all bring biases to everything we do every day. Survivorship bias is where you're just not sure, how this is going to work. Loss aversion, if I gave each one of you $10, you'd all be pretty happy, right? But then if I took the $10 back, believe it or not, there's studies that show you're even more unhappy now that I took the $10 away, even though you didn't have it to start with. The availability heuristic, which is where you just focus on one little dot of information instead of the whole big world of it. And then confirmation bias is the granddaddy of them all. That's where you only look for things that support your point of view, as opposed to looking for things that are opposite of your point of view. I always like looking at things, if I'm working on something and I'm having a disagreement with a coworker, I always try to figure out what's driving their thinking, what's driving their decision, and then looking at it and saying, is there something to that? Maybe I should change my mind. Thinking versus speaking. I came across this information when I was preparing in a presentation about a year ago, and I was pretty amazed at what this was. You can think up to 4,000 words a minute, which I was flabbergasted at, but apparently you can. But you can only speak about 125 words a minute. So what's that mean? You got all this stuff rattling around in your head, but you can only say a very small percentage of it. And I don't know about you, but that's when I start misspeaking or start saying things I don't really mean. So choose your words carefully as you're going through this. All right, so communication starts with listening. The biggest single problem with communication is the illusion it's taking place. How many of you know the actor Alan Alda? So when I travel the state doing following workshops, we're put about 1,500 miles on the car. So I try to always get an audio book from the Libby Library System, which if you haven't used the Libby Library System, is a great system because you can either download books or you can download audio things. Highly recommend it. So I was looking for some books, and I saw this book by Alan Alda. Actor, funny guy, right? I thought, well, that might be entertaining. I'll listen to that. And that was this quote came from that book. It's a tribute to George Bernard Shaw, but a lot of people say he never said it. But Alan Alda's book had this cover of him looking like this. And the title was, If I Understood You, But I Had This Look on My Face. And it was a serious book about communicating scientific discoveries to the general public. And there's actually a center funded at New York University in his name about that. Well, here we go. This is the other one, my favorite. The biggest communication problem is we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply. How many times have you had a conversation with somebody and you can't wait for them to shut up so you can tell them what really is important? So keep that in mind. I also think there's a thing called active listening. And practice this because I think from my own experience, it really works. So when someone's talking to you, about something, pay attention. So if my wife is saying something to me and I'm watching the football game or something, I will deliberately mute the TV and give her my full attention, even though it's driving me crazy that she's bugging me when my team's about to score. Show that you're listening. Nod your head. Provide feedback. So what you said was defer judgment. That's the hardest part of those conversations. And then respond appropriately. Sometimes, they're going to say something that you are so opposed to, you need some time to collect yourself. So respond appropriately. The appropriate response might be, hey, let's pick this up again next week when I've had some chance to reflect on it, to think about it, rather than losing your temper. Again, listen to what they're saying. Also, your body language is really important. If Stan and I are talking, I'm like, what's that tell Stan? I'm not listening to him. Here's another thing to consider. Oops. Come on. There we go. So this is actually scientific. When you hear something, it runs up your spinal cord to your limbic system. What's your limbic system in the brain? That controls your feelings. And then it takes a couple nanoseconds to get over to your cerebral cortex, which is the rational thinking part of your brain. And again, please don't tell my wife I've used all these examples. Sometimes we'll be talking and she'll say something to me and I'll go, what? And then a second later I'll answer because I didn't give the question enough time to get over here so I could think about it rationally. So there's science behind the fact that we hear something and our feelings are the first place that something goes to before it gets over to your rational thinking. Oops. Another way to think about something, and this is a great book, Getting to Yes. If you haven't read it, I recommend it. So there's positions and there is interests. So when someone tells you a position, do a deep dive with them as to what's behind that position. So for example, I don't want the city to adopt a zoning ordinance, right? I want to be able to do what I want to do with my land. I'm sure you've never heard that from any citizens. But the fact they don't want a zoning ordinance, well, what's behind that? Again, I want to be able to do with my land what I want to do. And you say, great. So your neighbor then has the same right, correct? Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Okay, the neighbor's going to put in a nuclear waste plant in their backyard. Is that something you want? Well, no, not really. So that's, if you get to the interest, you have that kind of conversation, you can start having a better discussion about how to find a resolution because now you understand what's really bugging them. That's just a little meme that tells you about how to do it. This one I found from one of our leadership classes in the Certified Public Manager program. And this is leading with questions. And so this is a way to start doing that deep dive with folks. So you're trying to understand where they're coming from, not just that they're not happy about something. You know, start with introducing the issue, understanding their perspectives, start talking about solutions based on those perspectives, and then what that shared action might be. Oop, there we go. And then this is a book I just started reading called The Scout Mindset. And again, I got it as an audiobook because it looked kind of interesting. And I listened to it while I was driving around the state in September, running around these different workshops. And I'm going to step over here. So there's the soldier mindset and the scout mindset. And a lot of us start with the soldier mindset, which is reasoning is like defensive combat, right? We don't want to reason. We just want to do what we want you to do. Can I believe this? Must I believe this? As opposed to, is this true on the scout side? And that reasoning is like map making. You know, you don't know what you have until you're done making the map. Finding out you're wrong means you suffer defeat. When I was a lot younger, I found out I was wrong. I always felt like I failed or something. Instead of thinking, no, I just need to refocus the way I'm putting my map together. Seeking out evidence to fortify and defend your beliefs. Again, a confirmation bias approach, as opposed to seeking out evidence that is going to make your map better. And so some of the related concepts for soldier mindset is She called it directional motivated reasoning, which is another fancy word for confirmation bias, rationalization, denial, self-deception, wishful thinking, all things we think that help us sort through in our heads, but really aren't very constructive to getting something accomplished, as opposed to trying to be accurate, understanding things, discovery, truth-seeking. And I added curiosity to this. I also recently got an audio book, A Curious Mind by Brian Grazer. Anybody know who Brian Grazer is? He's a movie producer, and he worked with, Opie from, what's the actor who was Opie on Andy Williams? That's it, Ron Howard. So he and Ron Howard produced a bunch of movies together, and if I told you all the movies he produced, you'd know who he was. But he wrote a great book about having a curious mind, being curious, and how it helped his career. And it's a great audio because it takes like 4 hours. So if you're driving somewhere, it's worth listening to. Okay, now we're going to go into some parliamentary procedure. So a motion under Robert's rules and your rules is a formal proposal by a member of a body in a meeting that the body takes certain action. So, motions are required on substantive issues. Again, avoid the negative motions. Accepting informational reports. What's the reason not to accept a report from your police chief or fire chief? You receive the report. If you accept it, there might be something in that report you don't particularly like. And by accepting it, you might be approving it. So just think about receiving reports, not accepting them. The motions should be fully stated and repeated by the chair when seconded. And motions under state law must be seconded.
I want you to say that again, just said before. I want the council to listen to that, because I've made that point several times about
Oh, okay, yeah. So, and it just is common sense, because if I knew your policy was to accept reports, I might cut a deal with the fire chief to put, handing me over $10,000, I give him two, and then I'm happy. It's just a better way to do business. It might seem like kind of nitpicking, but nitpicking is where things start to go south. Reaffirming existing policy. Now, if you had a policy and you haven't followed it ever, and you decide you want to start following it, you don't need to reaffirm it. You just say, we have a policy on this and we need to start following it, as opposed to wasting the council's time with a formal reaffirmation. So there are motions, there are main motion, and that's what starts the discussion. But only one main motion can be on the floor at any one time. There's other classes of motions that I'll go over here. Oops, I forgot I had a slide out of order. So the main motion starts the discussion process. What I love about this meme is the motion was made to fight over the bones, or the meat. It's been pointed out there is no meat, so now we're going to fight over the bones. Hopefully your meetings aren't like that. So, yeah. It's just very simple. I move that. So incidental motions, well, come on, relates to the conduct of the meeting, and these are some of the types of incidental motions. We have privilege motions, relates to the meeting itself. Question of privilege, call for orders. Call for orders is a Robert's Rule way of saying stay on the agenda. Some pressing issues. So let's say you've got a $2,000 an hour consultant coming in to talk to you about something, but you're not sure when they were going to arrive. So you put them at near the end of the agenda. Person shows up right when the meeting starts. You might want to move that person up to the beginning of the agenda, right? So you don't have to pay them so much money.
Or if they have a long trip home.
Yes. And subsidiary motions relate to the treatment of main motions, which are typically, well, come on, lay on the table, I'll talk about that, previous question, talk about that. Come on, there we go. Amendments are the most typical subsidiary motions. There we go. So, which of these, another quiz, just see if you're still awake. Which of these main motion statements are true? Main motion starts the discussion. Only one main motion can be pending at any given time. The main motion relates to the meeting itself. The main motion takes precedence over all other motions. Privileged, subsidiary, and incidental motions take precedence over the main motion. Number 1, second bullet, and the bottom bullet are the correct answers. The main motion is the main motion. It does not relate to the meeting. And the main motion takes precedence over nothing. And if you see from this order of proceedings chart, which is a little hard to read, here's your main motion. And here's all the other motions above it that take precedence over the main motion. So I'll show you how this works. Oops. So, at a budget meeting, somebody makes a motion to buy the clerk a new computer because they like the clerk and they think she needs a new computer. Then the rest of you says, and that's been seconded, then one of you wants to amend that motion to buy all the staff, all the department heads a new computer, because why should the clerk be special? Then, somebody says, you know what, maybe we need some more thinking about this. Let's refer this to the Finance Committee to come back with a recommendation. And then finally, oops. There we go. One of you decides it's going to be a long night if this is the way the budget discussion is going, so you want to take a recess to eat a Snicker bar. So how does this work? If you're the chair of this committee, how do you handle those 4 motions? So first is you take up the break, right? Because that's the highest order of proceedings. Then you take up the referring to the committee, because that's the next highest order of the proceedings. Then you take up the amendment to the main motion. So you take a break. You decide not to refer to the Finance Committee. You're just going to rip the Band-Aid off and get it done. And then you go to the amendment, which is to buy everybody a computer. That passes. Now what do you do? Oops. You still got to vote on the main motion as amended, right? Because the amendment by itself, even though it looks like you're voting on the same thing twice, you're just voting on the main motion as amended. It just so happens to be amended in such a way that you're voting on it twice. So does everybody follow that? So even if it seems a little ridiculous to have to vote twice on the same thing, you're not really voting twice on the same thing. First you voted on the amendment, now you're voting on the main motion. That just explains it. So here's a motion's life, start to finish. First thing you do is obtain the floor. Do you raise hands or do you have electronic or? Button. Okay, so you push your button. And then you wait to be recognized by the presiding officer. Then you make your motion. I move that. Make sure it's clearly stated. Again, avoid negative motions. You don't need to say so moved, although you see that in a lot of TV shows. And the motion should include a brief description of what you're talking about. This is not the time to launch into a 10-minute soliloquy about why it's the greatest motion in the world. Save that for the discussion. It just needs to be, I move that we buy the clerk a new computer. That's all it needs to say because it's self-explanatory. Then the motion must be seconded. So if you second the motion, does that mean you're in favor of it? No. In fact, you may second it because you never want to see the light of day. You want to vote it down, right? Never to see again. So keep that in mind. Just because you second it doesn't mean you're in favor of it. It just means you want to have a discussion. You want to get it in advance. So lots of times in committee meetings, you'll have the discussion first, right? Then you'll put together some kind of motion that reflects that discussion. Do you still need a second? Well, under state law, yes. But under Roberts, the fact you've already had all this discussion makes the second sort of automatic, because you wouldn't have thought it was worthy of discussion if you hadn't already had the discussion.
The thing that we do here is we actually say that. So I'll second the motion for the sake of discussion so that it can.
And again, you can have discussion before you have a motion. But typically, committee meetings are less informal. Your council meetings are typically more formal, where you start with a motion and a second and then discussion. So then the chair restates. Why does the chair restate? So everyone hears exactly what the motion is. Transfers that motion from the person making it to the body. So now you own that motion. And the only way you can get rid of that motion is by taking some action, either voting it down, sending it to committee, withdrawing. And again, once the chair restates, it belongs to all of you. We have a great video on our website on friendly amendments. So how many times, I've served on a number of nonprofit boards, and someone makes a motion, someone wants to make a friendly amendment. Well, under Roberts, there is no such thing as a friendly amendment. It's either an amendment or it's not. So keep that in mind. I will warn you, though, if you go to the website, there's 4 or 5 videos. They're all pretty well done. But who's been to the Small, Small World ride at Disneyland or Disney World? I'm sorry, I put that, you're going to be hearing that song the rest of the night. That's the way the music is on this video. Okay. Now, Roberts uses the word debate. I like the word discuss, because in my mind, a debate indicates a winner and a loser, whereas discussion indicates you're all trying to get to the best solution. So it helps fine-tune the motion. It can occur prior to the motion, the discussion. And even if there's plenty of discussion, if you're chairing a committee, you always want to make sure that everyone's had a chance to engage if they want to. It doesn't mean they have to, just make sure that they do. So amendments, amending is not a substitute motion. Obviously, main motions can be amended, but the amendments must be germane. So back to the computer, if the amendment is, I also want to give all the employees 10 weeks vacation. Is that germane to buying a computer? Probably not. I mean, it deals with staff, but it's not really the same as buying a computer. So that's, if you're chair, you can rule that amendment out of order because it isn't germane. And again, amendments require a motion stating the amendment, a second, and a vote. So you treat any amendment the same way you would a main motion. But amendments always take precedence. That's why you vote, in that example I gave, we voted twice, because the amendment took precedence over the main motion. And again, amendments are debatable and they're amendable. So my strong suggestion to you is, if you're running a committee, that you only have one amendment to an amendment on the floor at any one time. And why is that? So you don't get lost in the discussion. If someone wants to make a second amendment, you can say, hold on, let's finish this one first, then we'll go to your comments. Then there's some ways to deal with the motion. As I remember, you might decide, hey, we really need more information on this topic, let's refer it to a committee. So you just make a motion to refer to a committee for further study input. That motion is amendable. And typically, if you're going to refer something to committee, you're going to say, refer it to the Finance Committee, and they'll report back at our next meeting. So they have some sense of what the timing might be. If the subject is complicated enough, you might say, let's refer it for, let them mull it over for a couple months and then bring it back. Postponing and tabling is the most confusing part of Roberts. Because one, if you're watching C-SPAN and you see the Senate or the House, when they table something, what happens to the motion? It's dead forever. But under Roberts, tabling the motion just means you're going to lay it on the table and bring it back later. So back to the example about the consultant charging $2,000 an hour, so you want to move whatever agenda item is next, you're going to move that person up to that item. So whoever makes the motion should say, let's move this person up, and then we'll take the rest of the agenda items in order. So you're basically tabling the rest of the items until that person's done speaking. But if you table something and it doesn't come up in that meeting, then someone has to make a motion, and there has to be a second discussion to bring it off the table. Which means, can you then, if you bring it off the table at the next meeting, can you discuss it at the next meeting? No, because you got that nasty old open meetings law that says it has to be on the agenda. So keep that in mind. If you are the chair, you can table to a future time, or you could postpone indefinitely, which means it's dead. So just make sure that if someone's trying to table something, ask them what their intent is. Do they want to bring it up later in the meeting? Then word the motion accordingly. They want to bring it up meeting or two down the road, do that. Or if they want to postpone indefinitely. So there's a side trip on discussion. I like some of these locations I've never been to that I thought would be fun for taking a side trip. So the chair guides the debate. There's a discussion. Again, the discussion should focus on problem solving, not who's mad at who or who's mad at the staff. Again, listen to understand. Make sure you're fact-based. And again, respect one another. Yes?
Is there a significant number of times something can be amended?
No. But if it starts to get to the point of silliness, the chair might start calling things not germane, or the chair might decide that that's already been discussed, or the chair might decide, let's bundle all this into one, who else has got something they want to amend, and maybe we'll bundle it into one big amendment. Not saying that's wise, just saying that's what they could do. So the chair, again, is responsible for administrating the body's deliberations. It's always a good idea to have balanced participation. So if Randy makes a motion, Ted seconds it, Mayor says, Randy, would you speak in favor of your motion? Randy does. And then the chair says, does anybody oppose the motion? And if you're opposed, then you would speak. And then the mayor would say, anybody else for the motion? If you are and you want to speak, you would speak. In other words, go back and forth until everyone's had the chance to speak. Again, you don't have to speak. It's just the opportunity to. And for committee meetings, that's really a good way, especially if you're just having a lot of discussion, to try to find that balance so you can understand the positions and interests and biases of people that are involved. Robert says there's a 10-minute limit twice on any issue. Your rules say unlimited. So keep that in mind. So you've had a lot of discussion. It looks pretty clear that everyone's discussed out. So a way to get to that without taking a formal vote to end discussion is the chair could look around the room and say, any further discussion? Nobody says anything. Now the chair's got unanimous consent to move forward. Are you ready to vote? It's another one. This last point I got from a county board chair, been in board chair for like 20 years. Any new points before we vote? And apparently he would say it as sarcastically as he could. But you can't, as presiding officer, end the discussion by yourself. You can't decide by yourself, oh, I'm tired of listening to all this, let's just move forward. The only way you can end discussion, if the people still want to discuss, is to make a motion to call the question. And that needs a second. And then there's immediate vote. And and very important, if you have a motion to call the question, it takes a 2/3 vote to end the debate. Well, come on, here we go. Here's some other ways to do this. If someone does call the question, the chair could say, Councilmember Randy is ready to vote. It's a unanimous view of the council to close discussion and vote on the main motion. Everyone nods their head. Again, unanimous consent. But if someone says, no, I want to keep talking about this, then you've got to formally move to end discussion, second, 2/3 vote. Well, so, oh, come on, there we go. So members vote. I think I mentioned earlier I'm from Illinois, so I used to have a meme on here that said vote early, vote often, but it's not funny anymore, so I quit using it. So you can take votes in a variety of ways. Most local governments either voice vote or roll call vote, or some of them raise their hands. The division of assembly is my favorite. That's where you go into the ayes room and the nays room. So Parliament does that, I guess. And again, if it's a voice vote and you want to put everybody on record for how they voted, you could ask for a roll call. And again, even if it appears to be unanimous, ask for votes on both sides. Because there might be somebody who didn't say anything, but then decides they want to vote no. Another side trip on voting. So a quorum must vote. Your quorum is 2/3, which is, Margaret? 6, thank you. Unless there's a roll call vote, there's no record of an individual abstaining from a vote, and you're not required to vote. The city of Madison had a requirement in their rules that all alders had to vote. And they went to federal court. Federal court said, no, you have a First Amendment right to vote or not to vote. But I always advise governing bodies, you were elected for a reason. And not voting, you really should vote unless you've got a conflict. And if you've got a conflict, well, how do you deal with a conflict? There's two views. There's my view, and then there's the Ethics Commission's view. I'll tell you mine first. I think you should obviously remove yourself from participating or voting, but you don't have to disclose you have a conflict. You can just say, I'm leaving the room until the vote's over. And then you're treated as absent because you're not in the room anymore, so that might affect the quorum. The Ethics Commission says that you don't have to leave the room. You can sit in the audience, which means the quorum wouldn't be affected. But the problem with that is body language can say sometimes more than talking to people can. And so I think it's just, if you believe you have a conflict of some type, whatever it is, leave the room and just make it simple. That's my advice. You can listen to the Ethics Commission if you want to. Well, this just discusses all that. And really important, if there's a tie vote and the mayor declines not to break the tie vote, does the motion pass? No, because it wasn't. Sun Prairie actually had a city attorney that created an opinion saying if it's tied, the tie goes to the motion maker. He's not there anymore. Oh, am I doing this again? Yes. Oh, one other thing. Do you vote electronically also? So, if you vote yes, okay, so if you vote, before all the votes are counted, so if you vote yes, and we get to Tom's vote, he's next to last, and all of a sudden you change your mind, you want to vote no, you can change your vote because the vote's not been completed. But once the results are announced, you're stuck with your vote.
Another reason to ask for a voice vote is if there's a meeting coming up, you want it to be reconsidered. If it's only a voice vote and it's not recorded, if you vote one way or the other, anybody can consider a prior motion.
Yeah, and that's a parliamentary procedure approach where if it looks like you don't have the votes that night, you change your vote to be in favor of it, so then you can bring it up at a later meeting, assuming it's on the agenda, to reconsider. So I think vote present versus abstaining, because there are some screwy court decisions about it, whether abstaining is paramount to not having a quorum. So the results announced, whether the motion passed or failed, and if there was a roll call, how many votes on each side. So let's say something happens during the meeting and you want to make a point of order at the meeting at that time. So let's say the mayor got off the agenda by 2 spots. So you want the mayor to get back on the agenda. But you need to do it when you see it happening at the meeting. If you go home and think about the meeting and go, oh, wait a minute, I think we got off the agenda. I'm going to bring that up at the next meeting. It's too late. It's got to happen there. So you make a point of order, that you need to get back on the agenda. The chair determines for or against your point of order. So if the mayor doesn't want to do the 2 items he skipped over, the mayor might say, well, I deny your point of order. Then what do? Well, you don't throw eggs at the mayor. This is from the Ukrainian parliament about 10 years ago. I'm not sure which is more interesting, the fact that he brought an umbrella to ward off the eggs and the tomatoes, or the fact he didn't. It didn't work very well. So the member says, I appeal the chair's decision. The chair says the decision the chair's appealed. Then the chair has to say exactly why he ruled the way he did. And based on that explanation, you may decide to vote to sustain the chair's decision, or if you don't sustain it, then the mayor's got to go back and pick up the 2 agenda items. Sorry, sir, I didn't. All right, so remember, well, oops, got carried away here. This is a great quote. When I first saw this, I thought this was Bob Dylan. Doesn't that look more like Bob Dylan than John Lennon? But I think he does a great thing. He says, trying to please everybody is impossible. If you did that, you wind up in the middle with nobody liking you. You've just got to make a decision to do what you think is best and do it. And then John Wooden said, after the meeting, maybe he said nothing. Here we go. Success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction and knowing you did your very best to become the best you are capable of becoming. And then recently, I went to the funeral of Jonathan Delagrave, who was the Racine County executive, 51 years old, keeled over jogging on the high school track one day. I talked to him maybe a week or 2 earlier. Great guy. I think he died of a heart attack. So I went to the funeral, and the pastor, who was the uncle of Jonathan Delagrave's ex-wife's husband, got a little involved there, talked about this poem called The Dash. So if you haven't read it, highly recommend you Google it. It's very short. You'll like it. But the dash is between when you were born and when you die. So if you're wondering about these dates, I was born May 19th, 1955. My grandpa died at 77. My dad died at 77. So I figure I got about 7 years left. So with that, yeah, I think it's my wife's prediction, I'm not sure. And I really like this quote from Einstein: if I had a problem to solve, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about it and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. In other words, go back and do the homework as to why the problem exists, what caused the problem, and then start thinking about solutions. I'm the kind of personality, I like to get to the solution and then worry about what the problem was later. So I promised a quick commercial, and this will be very quick because I got 1 minute. I found out I can get a Mickey Mouse on my watch, and I found out the other day if I push the button, he talks. So Wisconsin Certified Public Manager Program's 18-month cohort that we sponsor. The people that are in the cohort, well, I'm going to use my minute up just trying to get the slides changed. It covers these different core principles. And I can tell you, we've been running the CPM program since April of 2021. And when we took it over, I just thought it was a good idea that the program continued to exist. I didn't know anything about it before we took it over. But I have seen the way it transforms the participants from basic employees maybe frontline supervisors into managers and executives. We are on our 6th cohort. We're starting our 7th in October. Great program. If you've got an employee who's great technically, but you want them to learn some management, executive skills, it's a great program. And we have, the other thing I think is great about the cohort is it's all the city positions, law enforcement, fire, public works. We've got a couple of clerks in this one, administrators, et cetera. And so I hope when we do the next cohort in October 2025, I'll be in touch, but hope you'll consider sending somebody. We also have a lot of state employees, and I think the thing that's great about that cohort is they learn as much from each other as they do from the instruction, and the instruction is all practically based. It's not theoretical. It's not like going to school to get an MBA. So with that, I won't go through the rest of these. Here's some great resources for you. And if you ever need to reach out to me, please send me an email, and I'll be happy to chat. And with that, thank you very much, and I hope you found this was worth your time, because this is an hour and a half you're not going to get back. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Foth. We appreciate you being here. All right, and with that, the Common Council workshop is done. Thank you very much.